Hey, top of the morning, everybody. Happy belated New Year. Welcome to the first episode of GoJo Golic of 2025. What do we have coming up in said episode? The Rose Bowl. Ohio State looking pretty good for an 8 seed here, and high seeds going down. And Mr. Fourth Quarter, Eric Dickerson, his rushing record for a season in the NFL, that's a 16-game season, is safe for now. We will tell you why, and so much more. Buckle up. GoJo and Golic kicking off right now.
Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Michael Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Emerson Latzia here with you guys to kick off 2025. We got a great show coming up. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out here live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. A good guest coming up in hour number 2 of the show. Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports going to stop by, help us react to everything we saw in the college football world yesterday. And Stormy Buonantony, fresh off her first ever appearance, helping call the Rose Bowl. She joined Holly Rowe on the sidelines with the A crew over at ESPN for the granddaddy of them all, as Ohio State absolutely blitzed Oregon in that game. So will be fun to catch up with her. Obviously been known her for a while. Great to see her taking some big moves as her career progresses there. Dad, we know coming into this one, a difficult show to start and talk about college football without addressing the tragedy that took place late in the early hours of New Year's Eve day in New Orleans, as the Sugar Bowl was supposed to be the third game capping off an exemplary day of football. You had the Fiesta Bowl. You had then the bowl games that we saw yesterday take place with Arizona State putting on a show. You had Oregon and Ohio State, and the nightcap was supposed to be Georgia and Notre Dame at the Sugar Bowl. And instead, because of a terror attack on Bourbon Street, where a person driving a pickup truck recklessly drove down Bourbon Street with the intent to cause harm and ended up killing at least 15 people with dozens more injured in the wee hours in the morning there. And so, Dad, what transpired after that was a lot of people searching for information, a lot of people very afraid, and understandably so. Everyone was, we appreciate the people that checked on us, wondering if we had been down at that game and seeing where we were and making sure we were okay. We did the same with a lot of our people down there, Dad. But first and foremost, you are absolutely gutted for the people in New Orleans whose lives were just changed forever. I heard Tyrann Mathieu talk about it yesterday, the Saints safety, saying, hey, New Orleans is a small city in all actuality, and so everyone is affected by this somehow pretty closely. And even if you're not directly affected by it, the empathy of watching lives taken and ruined senselessly really jars you as we begin this new year, unfortunately.
It's horrific. It's just horrific, and it makes talking about sports feel small. It really does, but it's something we have to do because that, unfortunately, going through the day after hearing the details of the horrific attack with a pickup truck, as you mentioned, killing at least 15 and injuring at least 30, just senseless violence. It's just horrific. And you're right, it changed absolutely the lives of so many people that we then were wondering about a football game playing later that night, our alma mater, which should be the furthest thing from everybody's mind, but it has to be played. It's going to be played. There's going to be a schedule of when it was going to be played. And everybody was wondering about it, switching from the real life horrible situation to the game life of playing football and a team advancing in the college playoffs. It's still weird to talk about, quite honestly, but it's something we're going to do. They're going to play the game at 4:00 Eastern today, as we'll get into. But it's just to go from the high of celebrating a new year, and we both been on Bourbon Street. We both been partying on Bourbon Street. We know how crowded it can get. Just the visual of that truck running through people is just a horrific thing, and obviously there's more information going on it. Did he act alone? And it sounds like he didn't, and it's tough to describe, tough to talk about. Thoughts are obviously with everybody involved as we try and go forward with this game.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a terrifying amount of practice with tragedy around sports and somehow still having to shoehorn in talking about the actual game. That's just the state of the world in 2025, unfortunately, and that continues here. And Dad, I did think from a playing perspective a lot about what it had to be like being a player on one of those teams, being a coach on one of those teams, being a staff or support member who, listen, as much as people don't want to think it, people go out sometimes the night before games. Some people, especially on the support staff, would make their way out. It's New Year's Eve down in Bourbon Street, and your heart immediately drops thinking, oh man, what if someone was out there? What if this team had to absorb that kind of tragedy? I know there was a Georgia student that was injured and was receiving care, and they put out a note about that. And our thoughts are certainly with that person. But Dad, just being a player and being a coach and trying to reset and have to focus on a game when, like you said, you're in a shelter in place. Both teams were sheltering in place in their hotel for a majority of the day yesterday, and then having to, go through walkthroughs, try and go through meetings while you're hearing reports about, did this person act alone? They had to go and sweep the Superdome again because there were reports of explosives planted near the site of the attack. And so you've got all these things now in the foreground of your mind. And while players at that age, we all feel somewhat invincible and insulated from a lot of life's problems, it's hard to ignore this. And I'd imagine will be a factor in these players having to go out there and play a game where now we know, so far down the totem pole, but the crowd factor is going to be different in a lot of this. There's a bunch of people who I'm sure had flights they couldn't get out of and had to move tickets last minute to try and get away from this. And so it really does every which way sort of break your heart, because now these players are going to have to try and compartmentalize something that should not just be shoved off to the side and play a football game here less than 24 hours after this.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, the attack, these attacks go in crowded areas, like Bourbon Street was crowded for this person to drive through. What's a crowded area? A game, right, with 70,000 people in the stadium. So while fans are getting ready to still go to the game and players and coaches are getting ready to participate in the game, is there that lingering thought in the back of their mind? This is another crowded circumstance. If this person didn't act alone, was there more planned? I mean, it's got to be this is life we're talking about. It's going to have to be tough to get that out of your mind and sit for the day and think about the tragedy that happened and think about, is there more coming in the stadium we're going to be in as you're trying to play for a game and advance in the playoffs. It's and you're right, because I tried to put myself in that situation as well, and obviously you can't do it. But from a player standpoint of, you go by the itinerary and you try and peak at game time of game day, and now you have to pull that back and kind of readjust, which both teams have to do. There's no advantage to either team. But as I said, is there the thought in the players and the coaches and the fans' mind of, we're going to another packed area? I mean, and it's just, I can't imagine what obviously the first and foremost, the families of the people that were killed and injured, but then just going forward, there has to be some trepidation.
Absolutely. Your players, you have families down there who now you're concerned about that you can't control being in these crowded areas. And then in the backdrop of all of this, you have the looming specter of the Super Bowl getting ready to be hosted by New Orleans coming up here at the beginning of February.
Right.
And now I'm sure questions will arise about, is that the best idea given everything that's happened here? Can things be made safe by then? And so those are all questions that we're going to have to ask and answer going forward. Coming off this is, again, we're, just over 24 hours removed from this tragedy. So our thoughts and prayers are first and foremost with the victims here. We hope that, law enforcement continues to find and track down the people that were a part of this and hold them accountable, and that we can try and return to some semblance of peace in that area that desperately needs it right now. So unfortunately, this is the no easy transition part of things. We're going to talk about sports now. We're going to talk about the college football games that happened yesterday. If that's not something you're really into yet, by all means, turn the channel, do something else. I totally understand it. But if you are someone who comes to sports for a little bit of escape, we're going to try and do just that and talk about some of the games that did happen yesterday and focus on the sports side of things that we tend to cover here, Emerson.
Yeah, that's right. So with the Sugar Bowl being postponed, that meant Ohio State and Oregon was the last game of the day. And really here, gentlemen, the Buckeyes ended the Rose Bowl before it even got started here. 99% of America was busy watching the end of that epic Texas-Arizona State game and the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Overtime. That was when Jeremiah Smith, by the way, took off for his first touchdown of the game. So here is the freshman phenom following his record-setting performance.
Week after week.
Will does a great job in practice, just trusting us, throwing the ball out there. We just tell him, just throw it out there. We're going to make a play for it. It don't matter if it's a bad ball or not. We just got to make our quarterback look good. But, Will playing with that confidence that he have, just being a leader out there, I feed off his energy. A great guy. I love Will to death, and I'll do anything for him.
All right, GoJo. First two playoff games, Buckeyes right now are playing like the best team in the country, and we're talking all three phases.
Yeah, no, Dad, that was the takeaway, I think, from the games played in the last couple of days was, if Ohio State continues to play like this, I don't know if there is a team that can beat them down the stretch of this season. Jeremiah Smith looked like the best player on that field by a country mile, 7 receptions for 187 yards and 2 touchdowns, including 5 for 161 in the first half alone. And then you called it out when we were getting ready and previewing these games early in the week, Dad. The job done by this Ohio State defensive line, Jack Sawyer, JTT is the bookends of a group that, for the 4 men across, really dominated and allowed Ohio State to drop back and give Dylan Gabriel nowhere to throw the ball in coverage. There were no windows because Ohio State could rush forward and get pressure on every single down. And the 3-and-out fest that took place in the first half while they put the vice grips on them, coupled with the job the offensive line did on the other side, really a dominant performance in the trenches that allowed Jeremiah Smith to go out there and show everyone why there are going to be people asking if he can go out in this year's draft so someone could take a crack at one of the most unreal wide receiver talents we've ever seen.
I mean, listen, he would be one of the top wide receivers taken in this draft, and he has to play 2 more years. You have to be, again, junior, 3 years in college before you can be drafted. It's between him and Ryan Williams, the true freshman from Alabama. My God, but what Smith did was incredible. What this team did, you're right. If this team plays like this, there is nobody that can beat them. That D-line had 8 sacks on Dylan Gabriel. That front 7 had 13 tackles for losses against that Oregon offense. That Oregon offense had now sacks count against rushing, so that was used against them. 28 rushes for minus 23 yards. That is just complete and utter domination. This game was 34-0 in the second quarter. Oregon got a touchdown right before the half to make it 34-8. But this was never a game. It was never close. We'll obviously talk about Arizona State and Penn State and how close that game, or I'm sorry, Arizona State and Texas, on how close that game was. That looked like a blowout, and then Arizona State came back in it. We'll get to that, but Oregon wasn't coming back. I mean, Ohio State was just too good. They had 181 yards rushing. I mean, Will Howard, again, it was 26 passes and 31 runs. They just dominated this game. But as I said, the best unit on the field is the defense, and especially the defensive line for Ohio State. They are absolutely on fire right now. They must have taken that loss to Michigan to heart because they have absolutely come out just on absolute fire in these playoffs.
I don't think anyone is going to be firing Ryan Day if they keep playing like this. And I understand it's a difficult pill for them to swallow. Maybe it's made a little bit easier by watching Michigan take down Alabama in the bowl game that we saw the other day, knowing that Michigan team was probably starting to round more into form by the end of the season and still had a great defense. But I get it. It's your rival. You're going to feel some type of way about that. The emotions tied to it are strong. But, Dad, this has been a good reminder that this is exactly what this Ohio State roster was built for. When we heard the $20 million number floated before the season, it was to make a run like this. And maybe you're right, Dad, that did serve as motivation. We heard Marcus Freeman in Notre Dame talk about how the Northern Illinois loss has been at the front of their minds since the beginning of the season. And they talk about it every week here. I'd have to imagine Ohio State, it's very similar with the Michigan loss. And for Ohio State fans, a national championship ring would probably feel a lot better than a Big Ten championship ring at this point. So I think we're leaving that conversation firmly in the past because, Dad, I still think the conversations that we had about the 1 seed in Oregon getting Ohio State as a draw in the quarterfinal round is a reason to re-examine seeding going into next year. If you're the best team all year in college football and you go and win your conference and you're number 1 and you've got to win over Ohio State in the regular season and all the things that Oregon had on their resume, this hardly feels like a quote-unquote reward in the second round of the expanded postseason. And so I think that furthers it. I know some people looking at Arizona State and what happened and all that might have quibbles about it, but I think the train has left the station, and I think rightly so, because for Oregon on the other side, Dad, I don't know if it goes like this. Every time that they play, they looked thoroughly outclassed. I mean, that Oregon offensive line that had been one of the better ones in college football all season long got bullied for the majority of the day here. Defensively, their heads looked like they were spinning. Safeties getting tuned up by Jeremiah Smith in the middle of that field. The running backs running wild because of some misdirection that Chip Kelly used. I don't know if it would go that way every time. And I think to that point, it goes back to this can't be the reward for being the best team all season long, even if we found out you may not actually be.
Yeah, listen, I agree with all that. I definitely agree that it needs to be changed. But the fact also remains they played in the regular season. Oregon beat them 32-31, albeit on a weird ending. It could have been an Ohio State 2-point win. But bottom line is they were right with Ohio State in the regular season. And Ohio State had another crack at them. And Ohio State was, let's just admit it, was more prepared and just took it to Oregon. They took Oregon. I mean, listen, we both played long enough to where a game gets away from you. And when a game gets away from you and you're getting beat physically and you're getting beat in score, your head starts to spin a little bit. You're trying to stay in the game. Your game plan on the offensive side is out the window, is absolutely out the window of what because you want to dictate to the defense as an offense, and defense wants to dictate to the offense. And Ohio State did all the dictating on the offensive side, on the defensive side, and Oregon was just left kind of scratching their head. But listen, I completely agree that this game should not have been a quarterfinal game. But like I said, they played in the regular season and Oregon beat them. Oregon has seen this team before, and boy, the difference is astounding from that game. Well, really, Ohio State almost put up the same, put up just a few more points, 10 more points in this game than they did the last game. But the defense for Ohio State is just incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's what stands out now is the show of force from Tennessee to Oregon has come from the Buckeyes. They have made the biggest statement through 2 rounds of the opening of the college football playoff, and so they deserve to be the odds-on favorite from here on out. And however we talk about this tournament is going to be through the lens of Ohio State, because at this point it does feel like it is theirs to lose. So that certainly the biggest takeaway on the football side there is the Buckeyes will now wait for this championship bracket to continue to unfold here as they sit right now. They get ready to face a Texas Longhorn team, Dad, that is going to be the story that we talk about next, because while Steve Sarkisian and that bunch managed to go and eke out a win, they move on for a blue blood matchup for the ages. I have to imagine TV execs all over ESPN are losing their minds at the thought of putting the Longhorns up against the Buckeyes. Now that game at the Cotton Bowl, so going to be a pseudo home game for Texas. But coming up next, let's talk about how they got there and why ASU running back Cam Scatabo may have offered the performance of the playoff already in the quarterfinal round. That's coming up next here on GoJo Golic.
All right, back here on GoJo and Golic, everybody. It was a ho-hum game that seemed instantly forgettable until Arizona State turned it up several notches with a brilliant late comeback here to almost pull off the monster upset against Texas in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Take a listen here to the MVP of the game, the Scat Man, who just so happened to be on the losing team.
Never had a puke award. But no, this is in 26 years we've never had to be able to do this. And with about 7 minutes left, the media voted Scat as the MVP. And so the offensive MVP of the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, Scat, congratulations.
All right, GoJo, against a loaded Texas defense, all he did was run for 143 yards on 30 carries, 2 scores, led the team with 8 catches, 99 yards, threw a 42-yard touchdown pass, ran for a 2-point conversion to tie it at 24, and then was throwing up profusely on the sidelines as well.
Yeah, Puke and Rally Scatabo, a man after my own heart in the third quarter, just unloading, said he was overhydrated and felt, quote, a little sloshy, which, brother, I can relate. But no, Emerson, to your point, I saw Paul Hembekides over at ESPN threw this out. Again, largely by most metrics, Texas is viewed as the #1 defense in college football. And Cam Scatabo led ASU in rushes, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, receptions, receiving yards, and passing touchdowns. In a game where he had to do everything to help them erase a 16-point deficit in the last 7 minutes of this game to tie it up and send it to overtime. Now, got a little bit of help from one of the best kickers in Texas Longhorn history, deciding to inexplicably push and pull 2 field goals down the home stretch of that game. And you saw the images of Steve Sarkisian coming up to him before that final one, after he had already missed one and pushed it wide right, going up to him, whispering sweet nothings into his ear. There were a lot of smiles, and then he went out there and immediately rewarded that with putting it off the left upright, and that game went to overtime. But Dad, while Texas gets to move on, and we'll have a conversation about them and Ohio State at some point, where if they both play as presently constituted right now through the playoff, it's not going to be much of a contest, and Ohio State's going to delete them if they're not careful. Because this Texas team played with its food, and Arizona State, Dad, that physicality of the run game led by Cam Scatabo was the difference in this game. They just gritted their way through a double-digit deficit after an early special team score and an early Swiss cheese-like performance from the Texas offense through Arizona State's defense had them in a 14-0 hole before they could know what direction was up.
Yeah, and I hate the fact that their coach, Kenny Dillingham, had to even say we belonged here. That's become too much of a talking point, is who belongs and who doesn't. The system is the system, okay? If the system puts you in, then you belong there. Should we say Oregon didn't belong because they got their asses handed to them? Should we say they didn't belong in the playoffs? I mean, I can't stand the fact that the losing coach has to justify them being there. The system puts you there, so you're there, so you deserve to be there. As I said, in the 14 playoffs, we've seen blowouts as well. So that's an argument I'm sorry that the coaches have to feel they kind of have to say after they get beat. Arizona State absolutely belonged there. And for a team that it looked like for a while, I mean, they could not convert a 4th down when they were going for it. They could not put the ball in the end zone when they were in the red zone. They just could not go through this Texas defense on a 4th down or in the red zone. They were down 24-8 with 10 minutes to go in the game. And at that point, they had just put up field goals and a safety that they had. And then all of a sudden, within a minute 30, they score 2 touchdowns. And, of course, it's Scatabo that starts that off with a 42-yard pass for a touchdown. And the dude was unreal. He was sick. He was throwing up. He would have to come off the field and take a couple of plays off before he'd go back on the field. He picked up a great blitz pickup toward the end of the game as well, just stuck his nose right in the chest of the defender. I mean, dude, there are going to be NFL teams. It's not going to be a first rounder, but there's going to be NFL teams salivating over what this guy can do for your team, the different ways that he could help a team. I don't know where he'll go in the draft, but there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to say, we want 22 guys like this on our team because he is one hell of a player. And listen, you know what's going to live in their minds, Mike? Overtime, 4th and 13. They had Texas on a 4th and 8, and then Texas moves, their top lineman, Banks, moves, and it's 4th and 13 in overtime after Arizona State had scored a touchdown and was leading. One stop, and you are moving on in the playoffs. And, I mean, inexplicably, they let a wide receiver get behind the defense. Just absolutely amazing. So congrats to Texas for that. But that play, while you rarely look at one play, Arizona State's going to look at that one play and say, we were one play away from advancing in the playoffs, one play from continuing a comeback from down 24-8 with 10 minutes to go, taking this team to overtime. Now they should be very happy for the way their season went, but as players and coaches, it's going to make them sick. It's going to make them sick to watch that play.
Yeah, I mean, we heard it from Dan Campbell in the NFL level, talking about how, hey, you're not guaranteed to get back to these stages. And when you've got these opportunities, especially as a team like Arizona State that did punch above their weight class this year, this was a much faster, I think, turnaround than most people expected for that program. And so it's never a guarantee. Look at TCU and the job that they did going into the college football playoff just a couple of years ago and making it all the way to the national championship. So you do have to appreciate the opportunities when they're there. And Dad, I'm with you. That was the play of the game for Texas. Quinn Ewers using the snap count. They picked up that all-out blitz perfectly and ended up hitting a receiver in the seam for a touchdown. So give that group credit for stepping up after what had been a tough fourth quarter for them, really spitting the bit. That Texas team looked shook in the biggest moments of that game until that time when they stepped up and made the plays necessary. And so I'm with you. Arizona State and these other teams having to constantly field questions about their own presence inside this sport just because everyone already wants this to be the SEC Big Ten Invitational has gotten pretty tired pretty quickly. So congrats to Kenny Dillingham and that bunch for the job that they did this season and showing people they absolutely belonged.
Yeah, as far as Steve Sarkisian in Texas, they're going to have to really be critical of themselves watching this film as they now have to take on Ohio State. Texas ran the ball 30 times for 53 yards. They averaged 1.8 yard per carry. I mean, they just could not run the ball. They had 322 yards of total offense, and Arizona State did have the ball for like 15 more minutes than Texas. Again, they just couldn't crack through and get into the end zone. And as you mentioned, Bert Auburn, the kicker for Texas, did miss 2 field goals that would have not gone to overtime had he made one of those field goals, but he missed 2. But Texas is definitely going to have some, and we know they can play better. We know that they were, at one point we were talking about them as a dominant team, especially on defense, dominant team. And Ohio State was dominant on defense. I look for even though both these teams can put up points offensively, I look for the defenses to really have a say in this game. But they're gonna have to be like, whew, a big exhale. And okay, they had 10 penalties for 67 yards in this game. I mean, they just did not play great football and were up 24-8. So they again have to exhale. They got out of it, survive and advance. There's no 13-person committee anymore. It's just you win and you move on, and they get to keep going.
They do. It'll be some good matchups in that game. Jahdae Barron, the Thorpe Award winner in the secondary against Jeremiah Smith in that wide receiver room. But I'm with you. All eyes on that Texas offensive line right now, getting to face an Ohio State defensive front that looked like a war machine. Emerson, let's get to the most lopsided game of the quarterfinals and what we saw a couple of days ago with Penn State and Boise State.
Which I think was better and more entertaining than what the 31-14 final scores suggest here. But the Nittany Lions, they came out with a 2-touchdown lead. GoJo always seem to have an answer. So now they are on to the national semifinals. Take a listen to James Franklin on the consistency he sees with his team right now.
13 wins, first time in program history. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton both surpassing 1,000 yards in the same season. First time we've ever had 2,000-yard rushers in the same season since joining the Big Ten. And then 34 wins over the last 3 years. We're very, very proud of that. Consistency is hard to do, and our guys have done a great job at it. The maturity that they have shown has been impressive. So 8-0 in Fiesta Bowls. Penn State loves the Fiesta Bowl. We'll come every year.
I mean, sometimes you got to toot your own horn, I guess, right?
Yeah. If you're James Franklin and you take as much heat as he usually does, I can understand wanting to give yourself some flowers. After a couple performances that, Dad, the more and more I watch Penn State, them and Notre Dame, very similar profile as a team in that they've got dominant defenses that have overwhelmed their opponents early and given their offenses extra opportunities to go out and try and be successful. The quarterbacks are talented but imperfect, and they've got dynamic runners in the backfield. It's really the difference is Penn State's finished in the red zone a little better than Notre Dame has as of late. But this one, to Dad, to Emerson's point, was closer than expected, although I felt like that had more to do with the fact that Penn State offensively, and I've sung the praises of Andy Kotelnicki plenty, the former Kansas offensive coordinator who joined the Nittany Lions this year, They got too cute way too often. You could have run outside zone until the cows come home and moved the ball the way they did in the first half, put up 40 and beyond your way. But instead, there was just way too much smoke and mirrors for my liking against a team that you could physically dominate when you chose to.
Yeah, I agree. Penn State could have, and listen, they won 31-14, but it was all, 10-point, 14-point game. It was like, could Boise State get back into this thing? There was always that one because they ran the ball. Penn State ran the ball for 216 yards, 41 rushes, 5.3 yards per carry. And you heard Franklin talk about his two backs over 1,000 yards. And you had your tight end, Tyler Warren, had over 1,100 yards. He had 2 touchdowns in this game. Another one of these guys we talk about in the NFL with a Justin Jefferson or a Puka Nacua, that they're always open. They're the biggest threat on the field, and somehow they're open. And that's what you can say about Tyler Warren is, my God, you have to cover the guy, and yet he's still at 6 catches for 63 yards, but 2 touchdowns, so I just gets the job done. And for Boise State, Ashton Jeanty, obviously they were going to give him carries. He ended up with 30 carries, just a little over 100 yards. So he wasn't a huge effect on this game. But the Penn State defense, Mike, in 2 games against SMU and Boise State, 6 interceptions, 3 in each game. I mean, you want to talk about just something that's going to be the difference in a game is turnovers to possessions, to extra possessions for your offense. So Penn State looked really dominant against SMU, pretty dominant here, and James Franklin does feel he needs to justify his team a little bit because he has come under some heat. Now he waits for the winner of Notre Dame and Georgia.
And that's going to be a much stiffer test because everyone always also looked at Penn State's path and said, hey, of the group of the teams that we're seeing right now, it might actually have been the 6th seed that got done the biggest favor by the College Football Playoff Committee. And worth noting, Dad, that dominant Penn State defense in this game didn't have Abdul Carter starting in the second quarter out with an upper body injury that they didn't name and kept him on the sideline. You hope that's just precautionary based on the way that the game was going there. But the other interesting thing coming out of this one, because they're going to be judged ultimately on what happens in the next game here. Boise State made too many mistakes. You mentioned the 3 interceptions, 2 fumbles by Ashton Jeanty and 1 lost fumble to go along with 2 missed field goals and 13 penalties for 90 yards. When you were the lesser talented team, you can't miss that many shots early. But Dad, the weirdest thing coming off this, and I want to talk about this when we get Jason Fitz on here coming up in the next hour, is the Drew Aller conversation coming off of this game. Drew Aller has always been traits-wise a quarterback that enamors a lot of people, but during the Penn State win over Boise, I saw Dane Brugler and a lot of people saying that while he has announced that he's coming back to school next year is Drew Aller, there are some NFL folks that wonder where he might be if he has a strong playoff performance coming out in this class that's viewed as a weaker one. So that to me was interesting. I've not been sold on Drew Aller in those same ways, and this game didn't do a ton to change me in a limited sample size, Dad, but the buzz seems palpable at this point, and this could be a year to sneak up higher if you are a quarterback with some tantalizing traits.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's more about the year of a weaker quarterback class on where he could fit in than his ability, because I haven't been sold on him either, quite honestly, and thought, oh, come back, okay, get another year. That's smart. But because it's a weak draft class, maybe he can do something. We'll see. Obviously, he's not concerned about that yet as he's getting ready for a semifinal game.
Yeah, no, bigger fish to fry at this point in time here. So they will wait and see as Penn State, Texas, and Ohio State all move on. We will get to the Sugar Bowl, but coming up next, an interesting dilemma for one NFL team and their superstar running back on the cusp of history. Did the Eagles make the right call? Next on GoJo and Golic.
All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic, everybody. Week 18 in the NFL is here. The Eagles taking on the Giants. The game means nothing for the Giants. Well, I guess in terms of the draft, it does, and position there. The Eagles, win or lose, this does not impact their seeding when it comes to the NFL playoffs. Saquon Barkley, he was honest on Wednesday afternoon. He wanted a shot at Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record this week, but he's also at peace with Nick Sirianni's decision to rest him and other starters this weekend.
I mean, he asked me if I wanted to play, if I want to go for it. I said on Sunday, I probably didn't care too much for it. When I slept on it, it was like an opportunity to implant my name in football history. I may never get another opportunity like that again. So I'm down, but at the end of the day, I don't care for putting the team at risk. He's the head coach for a reason. He makes those decisions, and whatever decision he wanted to make, I let him know if you want me to play, I'm going to go out there and make sure I get it. And if I don't, I'm okay with that too.
All righty, GoJo. With that, Barkley's historic pursuit of a 40-year-old record comes to an end.
Yeah, and Dad, interesting that we watched almost two historically impressive running back records come to an end in the same season. Ashton Genty finished, 131 yards, or needed 131 yards to tie Barry Sanders' record. He finished 28 yards shy of Barry Sanders' single-season rushing record in college set back in 1988. And now as it sits with Saquon Barkley with this news, he'll end up 101 yards shy of Eric Dickerson's record. Now, Dad, we know that it was a difference in the amount of games, the same way it was when Eric Dickerson broke the record, more games than O.J. Simpson had the record in originally, and on we go. This is the right decision by the Philadelphia Eagles because the pursuit of this record affects more than just Saquon Barkley's rest if they were to go this way. And we've talked about the Eagles, because of health and the way that they've played down the last quarter of the season, are well positioned to be one of the teams that could break out of the NFC and make a trip to the Super Bowl. And Saquon Barkley has been a huge reason why of that, but so is that offensive line. And if you're going to put Saquon out there, that means you're going to put the starters out there on that offensive line and run the risk of potentially injuring one of those guys at a point in the season where you just can't afford that. So it hurts me for Saquon Barkley because the chance to have your name firmly embossed in the record books forever in the NFL has to be a wild thing to be staring at and know you can't have it now. But ultimately, this is the right selfless decision for this team.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but boy, to be this close. And it would be against the Giants as well. I mean, talk about adding the cherry on top of trying to break Eric Dickerson's record against your former team. And even though it's one more game, he has 34 less carries than Eric Dickerson does. So if he would have got the record, he would have probably had around the same amount of carries. So he actually has less carries than Eric Dickerson does, even though, and it'll be done at 16 games. He has 345 carries. I believe Eric Dickerson had 379 carries in his 2,105-yard season. But you said it right. I mean, they can't be the number one seed, so they're going to have to play the next week. And their bye was in week 5. So they've had 12 straight games, and they're not getting the bye because it's either Detroit or Minnesota, the winner of that. And you're exactly right. They have to start the entire offensive line. Now, the entire 5 on the starting offensive line can't sit. You don't have that many offensive linemen on your roster.
Sure.
But you can sit 2 or 3 of the players, but you would have to have basically your starting unit out there. And Jordan Mailata, to his credit, the left tackle for the Eagles, tried to talk Nick Sirianni into saying, let's go for the record. And I could see that being a prideful offensive line, considered one of the best, if not the best offensive line in the league, to say we were the line blocking for the new record holder for a single season rushing amount. That would be a very, very prideful thing. So I understand Jordan Mailata, and I'd imagine you as a former old lineman, you would be saying the same thing. Let's get him the record. Let's get him the record. But from a team aspect, you have to take a breath, step back, and say, okay, we've had our bye week 5. We played a lot of games. We don't get a bye. We have to play next week. Man, you just can't take the chance because this team should be able to make a deep run.
Yep, I completely agree. And I'm with you. If you look, it's funny when you do call games and you look at media guides up and try and find the bio of offensive linemen. under the stats department, they put what the quarterback passed for, or they blocked for a 1,000-yard rusher, or a team that paved the way for X amount of yards of total offense. Like, you don't have stats, so you live vicariously through your smaller friends who are talented athletes who get the ball every other play. And yeah, Dad, I think you already saw that too, right? The amount of pride that Eagles offensive line took when they all got the curtain call after Saquon cracked 2,000 yards. He's still one of just 9 running backs in NFL history to crack 2,000 yards in a single season. And so they'll all get to have that. And Dad, if they play this the right way, they could have Super Bowl rings, which I think would matter a lot more to this group. And some of the guys that have been around longer and experienced that. A guy like Lane Johnson, because Jordan Mailata, I love him saying that. The golden-voiced giant who is one of the best players in the NFL at his position and is also 27 years old. I think of 34-year-old Lane Johnson on the other side, who in the last few years has dealt with a litany of injury, does a phenomenal job of taking care of his body. But you think of guys like that you want to make sure are going to be okay down this home stretch. So it's the right call. You feel for Saquon to a certain extent, but again, they've got bigger goals they're trying for.
I'm wondering on an aside, and it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but do you have a problem with Eric Dickerson saying he doesn't want his record broken?
I don't know. And maybe this is more the how he said it than the what he actually said. But I don't own any records at this point. So I would love the idea of having one and having your name somewhere. I mean, God, Dad, you and your, elementary school friends that were in your club swim team and held the record for the relay race that you guys would point back to. What was the pool in the relay race thing where every time we would go back to Ohio, my dad would point to their relay team's record at that pool up on the board from when you were in elementary school?
That was it. That was at Manry Pool, our summer swim team in Willowick, Ohio. We'd swim against other cities. And me and Dave Neckick, Mike Slavey, and Eric Schuster had a relay record that stood for 30-some years.
Beast.
And it was finally broken. And instead of me congratulating the guys that broke them, I accused them of being on steroids. And that our record was still safe. No. I definitely we didn't want that record broken. But I was certainly happy for the group. Putting in more older context, I wrestled at Notre Dame.
Whoa.
And one of the records only record I have is I have the fastest pin in Notre Dame wrestling history at 13 seconds. Now, listen, Notre Dame doesn't have a wrestling program anymore, so it can't be broken. But even if they did, I've said this many times over the years when we've had guys who held records on the show, I would not want my record to be broken. Now, I would say I would absolutely congratulate. I would go shake the hand of the person that broke my record, and I would be happy for them. But if you ask me flat out, do you want your record broken? I would say no. So I agree. It's more in the way you say it of, no, I'd rather my record not be broken, but I would certainly congratulate the person and pat him on the back and shake his hand to the person that broke my record. But do I want it broken? Hell no.
This is, I think, sort of like an offshoot for me because this didn't bother me with Eric Dickerson, but I don't know, I get a little tired every year of the 72 Dolphins popping champagne in the face of some team that loses here. That bit maybe has gotten a little old for me, but those are guys that certainly don't want that record broached, and they've maybe been at the forefront of going out there and what feels like hating on the teams that are going and trying to do it now. So, I had no problem with that. You and I got to see Eric Dickerson, by the way, at the SMU Penn State game on the road when we were there. I walking into there, I had never met Eric Dickerson in person, and I know Saquon Barkley as physical imposing a running back as the NFL's ever seen, but shaking Eric Dickerson's hand at his big age and seeing the way that guy still looks, you can understand why that dude was such a load to tackle.
Dude was put together, and he's a guy I had to tackle in my career. I always talked about how straight up he ran and always going to take a hard hit. Well, he basically said, screw y'all. I can still run this way. Craig James was in the suite as well when we were at that game, the old Pony Express. I mean, the two of them are still great friends. And they shared that backfield. Just an amazing thing to see them. But you're right. Eric Dickerson looked like he could still tote the ball a few times a game.
Yep, he had a few carries there. So if he wants to talk his talk, I'm more than willing to let him because it seems like he might still be able to walk the walk. So Saquon Barkley will not get to pursue his record this weekend, Dad, but they will get to pursue plenty more beyond that. Same can't be said for a guy in Aaron Rodgers who, getting ready to lace it up this weekend in their season finale against the Dolphins, acknowledged that this could very well be his last NFL game. He said, quote, "I think there's going to be change here. And if I'm a part of that change, then I just want to make sure everybody knows I have nothing but gratitude for my time here." So it is something that's not been wholly unexpected, Dad. The Jets conversation's become very unfun this season and it's basically just turned into, has Aaron Rodgers said something weird or is he playing badly and we get to talk more existentially about his future? That conversation comes to an end this weekend, but it would be interesting, Dad, how we will do the career retrospective on Aaron Rodgers when it's all said and done, because while PR-wise in recent years he's become incredibly polarizing, there's still so much of me that can't forget the player that we had for so long from him, who we may very well see for the last time this weekend, maybe in a Jets uniform, but could be for the entirety of his career, as a guy who's 41 and coming off that Achilles injury never looked like himself this season.
Listen, I know how I'll remember the career as one of the great quarterbacks I have seen play. I mean, not only he's walking into the Hall of Fame 5 years after he retires, walking. There is zero debate about that. If the writers have any common sense about him, he is a walk-in Hall of Famer. But Mike, his ability, his accuracy, and it's not just the completion. He was so great at placing the ball, at keeping his receivers out of harm's way. If it was a crossing route and there was a backer that was front side, he'd throw it back shoulder across the middle to not get his guy hit or hurt. He would lead his receivers, let them catch it in stride to get yards after the catch. He was one of the greatest ever at completion percentage. But again, it wasn't just completion. It was where he put the ball. These couple of years with the Jets are not going to hurt his legacy. As you said, he became more known for his comments out of football than football play. I mean, the polarizing comments that he made. His football play speaks for itself. He is a walk-in Hall of Famer that I don't know a team that would take him next year, Mike, because he's not going to go to a rebuilding team unless it's a quarterback bridge, but I don't think he's the bridge type quarterback. And a contending team, I don't think they're going to go all in on Aaron Rodgers for 1 year. I don't think there's going to be a place for him in the NFL. But again, it's a Hall of Fame career. He can leave with his head held high. You know, you always like to go out on top. You always like to. But that is rarefied air that you do, and he's not going to go out on top, but he's still going to go down as one of the great quarterbacks to play the game.
We know this season, excuse me, has been a far cry. 25th in total QBR of 33 qualified passers. It's just the fourth time in his career he's thrown double-digit interceptions, with 10 so far this season. But he's also on the verge of becoming the fifth player in NFL history with 500 touchdown passes, and he's just 115 passing yards shy of going over Matt Ryan for seventh on the career list. And so, yeah, I'm with you, Dad. Like, we're having some conversation about Eli Manning as a first ballot Hall of Famer this year or not. Aaron Rodgers feels like a first ballot Hall of Famer to me. And the Mahomes comp is always there because they overlapped a bit more. But man, I think in a world where we watch Josh Allen now, and the scouting report on Josh is you can't let him break the pocket going right. Aaron Rodgers was the original guy in my lifetime that I got to watch who was, hey, it's almost by design. Their tackles are inviting guys inside so he can get on the perimeter there and make some truly special throws happen here. So he is going to be one of the top 10 quarterbacks that ever played for a long time. I remember we used to have that best versus most accomplished argument with him and Tom Brady at the height of their careers before Brady just put so much hardware on top of the two. So he was a guy that did scratch that rarefied air of someone we talked about as one of the best quarterbacks of all time.
Yeah, he did. And a lot of his game was taken away when his mobility was taken away, right? I mean, his movement, it was Pat Mahomes-like, the way he could move, whether it was right or whether it was left, and still make a play downfield. Now, if he took off and ran, he could be somewhat dangerous running. He wasn't going to kill you running. He was going to be able to move the sticks running. But him getting out of the quarterback was an absolute uh-oh moment for the defense because of the magic that he could perform. And once that was taken away, that really, really hurt his game.
Yep, and now we're at the enigma portion of his career where if you want to watch Aaron Rodgers perform at the highest level, you're going to have to do it on Netflix right now. And so it's been a jarring change, no doubt, seeing someone that you saw do so many spectacular things for so long finally physically degrade. But Father Time, as always, undefeated. Coming up next, we will get to a little bit of NBA action. Karl Anthony Towns with another big night for the Knicks. And Jason Fitz will stop by to help us preview the Sugar Bowl and more next on GoJo and Golic.
Back here on GoJo and Golic, everybody, where on the hardwood, New York continues to thrive against inferior competition, and it has them in striking distance of the top seed in the conference. Karl Anthony Towns is a huge reason why. Dude just notched 31 points, pulled down 21 boards against the Jazz on Wednesday, making him the first member of the Knicks since Patrick Ewing 34 years ago to record multiple 30-plus point, 20-plus rebound games in the same season. Josh Hart, he registered his second straight triple-double as the Knicks extended their win streak to 9 games. Coming up next here on GoJo and Golic, the jazzy Jason Fitz will join the program.
Hour number 2 here on GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Emerson Lazio with you guys. Coming up in about 30 minutes, Stormy Buonantony is going to join us, ESPN sideline reporter who was one of the analysts on the sideline at the Rose Bowl yesterday when Ohio State put it on Oregon enthusiastically. Stormy is accomplished. She is a rising star. I cannot wait to talk to her. Unfortunately, to start the hour in the meantime, though, we have Jason Fitz that'll come here and do his very best here. College Football Power Hour over on Yahoo Sports is where you can find him here. Fitz, good morning. How you doing?
But is it a good morning, Mike? I mean, is that the way we're starting our new year? That's the way we're, look, don't make me come through the screen and give you a long hug. It feels like somebody might still be hungover from New Year's Eve. Ooh. It's not me because, I'm over here dry and fit, buddy. So it's not me, but maybe you need a hug.
I think between you wanting to hug everyone, Emerson Lazio has spent the morning challenging my dad to a wrestling match once he heard that he was a collegiate wrestler. It's just getting a little bit way too bro-lovey around here. And so I think we need to pump the brakes. I think this is a good day for all of us to be separate and remote in talking about this. And Jason, I think your New Year's resolution needs to be to hug people less.
Mike, I want this wrestling match to happen. I want in on it, but here's the thing. I don't want it to be a college wrestling match. I want it to be full WWE, like wearing the little shorts coming up and going like, ooh, yeah, like on the ring. Like I want to be Jimmy Mouth of the South Heart. I want to come in with a megaphone.
I got a singlet ready to go. Senior, you still got your singlet? Still
Emerson, I'm not in your corner. I'm walking in with Senior. I'm walking in with Senior, and Senior's being calm and cool, and I'm the one in the corner going, wow, wow. The whole way. Like, we know this. Come on.
GoJo. Then it's you and me. It's you and me and our dressed up as, Shrek and Fiona.
Which one's Shrek?
I am.
All roads. God help us. God help us all here. We have strayed so far from the Lord's light just one day into the new year here. Fitzy, we'll talk about it more with Stormy later on here. The Ohio State game felt like the biggest takeaway from this college football playoff quarterfinal round that we've had so far here, but I will give you the first 3 games that we have had in this quarterfinal round before we get to looking ahead a little bit at the Sugar Bowl and how complicated that situation's gotten here. What has been your biggest takeaway now through 1 3/4 of the first 2 rounds of this expanded playoff?
Well, the funny thing is that every rule has an exception, because I was so ready by the end of yesterday with the Texas game to yell and scream, if you can stop the run and you can run the football, you win these games. Every single time, whichever team is more effective running the football absolutely dominates. But then what do we see? The worst of Texas, again, is when they cannot establish the run at all. And then all of a sudden it gets to Quinn Ewers' shoulders, and it's difficult for them. That offense doesn't click if they're not running the football well. So what happened yesterday, I felt like I was going to be right about this take overall. And then somehow Texas survives, even though they weren't able to stop the run in the second half particularly, and they were never able to establish the run. So, look, I think that's a big win for Texas. I think the college football playoff needed a close game just to shut everybody up about all the problems. Like, it's nice to finally get a close game. So I'll give that some love. But the most surprising thing to me, seriously, has been that first 2 rounds, both times we said, well, the good game's going to be the Ohio State game. And both of them were done in the first quarter. Like, this team comes when y'all talked about the offensive line after the Michigan game being a problem. What the changes that they made and the stability that they got there. Now Will Howard all of a sudden looks like Superman throwing the football, and those weapons are unstoppable. It's just he's doing a better job of finding those weapons. Oregon looked outmatched, outclassed. Like, I thought that was a stunning win for Ohio State for the second straight round of the playoffs. Not that they won, but that they won in that fashion.
Oh, yeah, that they won that big, again, for two teams that played during the regular season, and it was a one-point game. You could see the different directions that both teams went. So Texas, I was going to say, you think they have to obviously improve the run against Ohio State, because Ohio State, they're going to be so heavily favored in this game.
Yeah, and look, go back to the SEC championship game. Heavy expectations for Texas. What were they not able to do? They weren't able to establish the run at all. And if you just look at the average weight of the defensive linemen for Arizona State, weird thing to be, obsessed with. But Adam Brenneman, my co-host on the College Football Power Hour, pointed out a month ago that if you look at the size of the guys on Arizona State's defensive line, they're bigger than you think, and they're going to be able to hold up better was the concept. Well, he was right. In that matchup against Texas, they were able to hold up. If Texas can't run the football, their offense just looks anemic. And unfortunately for Texas, it's not going to get any easier through this process, because you look at the teams that are left at this point, and all of them so far, and we'll see what happens out of the Georgia Notre Dame game, obviously, but even no matter who wins that game, the teams that are left can all stop the run. So it's so weird, because I feel like we're talking about 90s football all of a sudden, but realistically, when you look at these playoff teams, got to be able to establish the run. You got to be able to stop the run. And Texas not being able to do that really made a game that I thought should have been a blowout, a close one.
Yeah, to Dad's point, Ohio State open on DraftKings Sportsbook, or at least sits right now as a 6-point favorite in a game that's going to be a Texas home game, like played at the Cotton Bowl. That one is going to have a ton of burnt orange in the stadium there. The same way, quite honestly, Texas played a road game out at the Fiesta Bowl, or out where they were at in Arizona, seeing all of the Arizona State jerseys in the crowd there. So difficult one there. Fitz, I wanted to talk to you about this. You mentioned Adam Brenneman, who's a proud Penn State alum. Are you buying or selling that a strong playoff run could give reason for Drew Aller to consider throwing his name into the NFL draft for this season? He's previously stated he's coming back to Penn State, but I'm sure you, like the rest of us, saw a lot of draft pundits starting to have conversations about if Drew Aller continues to go and put good things on tape, his set of skills is particularly tantalizing in a weak quarterback class.
Yeah, you're right about that. And I was a little surprised. In fact, I was hitting people up a month ago saying, hey, do we think Aller's coming back or not? Because once you get past Cam and Shedeur, like the gap between the rest of them is massive, right? And so a lot of them were talking about second, third round picks, and that's still a reach for some of them, right? So, if you're sitting here and you're Drew Aller, you got to look around and say, hey, am I happy being the third best quarterback off the board? I think that's where he would go in this situation if everything broke right for him. Or do I want to come back for a year and see if I can be the number one quarterback off the board? Understanding, too, we also saw a new offensive coordinator, new offense. They pushed the ball down the field a lot more with Drew Aller over the course of the season. But he's also had to get comfortable in this offense pretty quickly, right? So I wonder if another year in that offense gives him even more opportunity to fly up the board. But I'm with you, especially if Penn State wins a national championship. If you're the quarterback of the national champion Penn State team, you got nothing to gain by staying in. You've got all this momentum from coming out. I wonder if he rethinks that decision. I would if I were him.
Yeah, there's the thought of quarterbacks are always overdrafted, and there's maybe two, and you said it, Shedeur and Cam Ward as first rounders, and maybe nobody else should be in the first round, but we know that doesn't happen all the time. Someone could sneak in, and I would think if he went, it would be more because it was a weak class than his skills that he could hone more if he were there another year. Thinking of another guy going into the NFL, what's your thought on Cam Scatterbo from Arizona State, who was all everything in this game? He had a hell of a year, fifth in the Heisman, said there's no better running back in the country. What do you think of his draft status and pro potential?
I think this game was big for that, right? Because Texas is they're a bunch of huge human beings on that defense, right? And for his ability to just go in and will them throughout, like the touchdown run where, frankly, his offensive lineman deserves an assist on that for picking him up and body slamming him into the end zone. But I think the way Cam played against that defense really helps. This is a strong running back class, to be honest. And Cam feels a little bit like the story is great for anyone that hasn't seen it. He needed to lose a little weight, maybe recommit some things in his life. The coaches have talked about this. The broadcasts have talked about it. He really committed this year to being a better football player, and the results were undeniable. So for Cam, it's sort of win-win. The only thing I'd say is that, man, burn on the tires is just such a big deal for running backs that are coming out, right? Does he want to take another year of just getting pounded, or does he want to try and come out and give himself opportunity? I think Cam has real opportunity at the NFL level. He's not Ashton Genty to everybody, but it is funny how Ashton Genty in the playoffs seemed to, like, people started to say, oh, well, maybe Ashton can't do it at the NFL level. Let's be honest. I mean, Ashton didn't get a lot of help from his offensive line. I'd love to see what his yards before contact were in that game against Penn State, because anyone faulting Ashton Genty for that loss, he was making a jump cut the 3 yards in the backfield on the first drive. They were all over.
Yeah, it was like watching the Avengers Endgame scene where Captain America is trying to fight his way through those crowds, knowing that of a lot of those superheroes, he is certainly up a little more challenged than the rest of them there. So certainly felt the same way for Ashton Genty and some of the struggles in that game. Fitz, let's look ahead. The Sugar Bowl has obviously become a really complicated conversation because of the horrific attack on the streets of New Orleans late at night on January 1st, as 15 people tragically have lost their lives, dozens more injured, and now the game, Fitz, delayed just under 24 hours. It'll kick off at 4 o'clock Eastern today. We know the players and their teams had to shelter in place at their hotels for a while yesterday here. How do you think this actually affects the way that this game goes, and what do you expect from Notre Dame and Georgia?
I don't think it will change the outcome of the game or the way the game itself plays. I do think, y'all know this better than anybody as former athletes, coaches and teams love rhythm, and they love being able to plan exactly what routine is going to be going into a game. So I think the delay, obviously, you got to know that every coach is sitting around here trying to keep everybody focused, which is hard when you're all, being forced to stay in place and there's all of this going on. Also a weird kickoff time, 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. All of that feels a little bit interesting, but once kickoff happens, it doesn't change this game to me. This game is all about which offense is going to be able to manufacture points. There's a quarterback in it that I don't trust, and there's a quarterback that I do. And I don't want to oversimplify everything and just make it about quarterbacks. But when both of these defenses are as good as they are, I got Riley Leonard on one side that we actually know something about, and then a backup quarterback that we haven't seen any. And I love Georgia fans have been killing me every time I've sat here and said I don't love going into this with their backup quarterback, and they'll come in and say, well, he was highly recruited and he's even more athletic and he creates problems. This is the thing I keep going back to. There's a part of every coaching staff that advance scouts. So their only job is to start scouting everything for an upcoming opponent. This is at the college level. This is at the NFL level. The thing that I think we're not putting enough weight in is that the advanced scouts for Notre Dame knew before the Indiana game, their only job was to start breaking down Georgia. You want to tell me that they weren't doing the same thing that we do when we're looking at prospects for rivals, looking at high school film, looking at everything they can get at a kid that has barely played, right? So Gunner's going to come in with no real advantage in that sense. To me, Notre Dame's had a couple of weeks to sit here and get ready for Georgia. And so if you think that there's a big advantage by putting a quarterback out there they haven't seen, I think we're forgetting that there's a portion of the coaching staff that's been getting ready for this matchup for 2 weeks. I just think it's asking too much of a quarterback we've seen nothing from to come into a playoff game against that Notre Dame defense and get a win, and I don't think anything changes that. I think Notre Dame rolls.
So you don't think we're underselling Gunner Stockton at all? He was highly recruited, and he's playing behind, at least in the beginning of the year, was a Heisman hopeful in Carson Beck. I mean, there was a reason he was a backup. I'm just wondering if that's being an undersold thing, that he's a backup coming in.
So here's the thing I like to do is sort of just apply universal benefit of the doubt. So if I'm going to give benefit of the doubt that Gunner goes in and plays clean football, I mean, we're talking just absolutely crushes it, then the next part of it is I need a receiving corps that led the nation in drops. No team in all of college football dropped more footballs this year than Georgia, as stunning as that is. I need that team to then catch those footballs, which is asking a lot. And then I also need Georgia to play a really clean game all the way across the board. Because the one thing you can't do is get yourself in obvious passing situations against Notre Dame. I don't think that you can beat the back end of that defense when they know what's coming. So all of a sudden, I got to make sure that there's no penalties. I got to make sure that my receivers hold on to the ball while my backup quarterback that comes in and suddenly is going to be this big athlete is able to do that. And also, the other side of it is matchup-wise. You want to tell me that Notre Dame's not used to taking on a quarterback that can also run the football? Like, I feel like they face that a lot in practice. I feel like that's part of what they handle. All of these things stack together where it makes it feel to me like it's an uncomfortable matchup. Like we always talk in the NBA, just look at the matchups, not necessarily the brands. If you take all the brands out of this and you just look at the matchups, I don't think any of that favors Georgia. Georgia's defense is going to be tough to get points against. The problem is you got to score points to win. This feels like a low-scoring, ugly football game that Notre Dame wins by 10.
Yeah, the over-under for this one right now, 45.5. And if you are inclined to lay some money down on this one, the under, seems like a pretty safe bet, given, like you said, the pedigree of these two defenses. Real interesting checkup at the end of the season here for the Notre Dame offensive tackles who got their start for this season as two players and Emil Wagner on one side. And on the other side, Anthony Knapp, who ended up being a freshman All-American, against Texas A&M and Nick Scorton, and that incredible D-line on the road in College Station, now gets to at least in part end their season facing a Georgia front with Jalen Walker and company, who looks as imposing as any group in college football and is certainly schematically as impressive as any group in college football. We know Kirby Smart and that group are going to – I think it'll be a really exciting chess match on that side of the ball for both them and Al Golden's Notre Dame that throws a ton of different things at a ton of different people. All right, coming up next, because we spent a lot of time talking about the playoff, and understandably so, we did get a couple of interesting results from the rest of bowl season that call into question a lot of the arguments made on behalf of the SEC and one team in particular when it came to the expanded playoff and who should be or shouldn't be in. That's next on GoJo and Golic. Before we look ahead to Michigan sending shockwaves through the SEC network and their claims that Alabama should have been in the 12-team playoff, guys, the world of football has its own version of block charge with targeting or no targeting, it seems. And we'd be remiss if we didn't, have the same conversation that everyone else is about to argue about today. Late in the Arizona State-Texas game here, there was a pass to Arizona State wide receiver Stovall, where a hit from Michael Taffy, the Texas safety, came down over across the middle, was reviewed for targeting, and ultimately it was ruled not targeting, even though it seemed everyone in the broadcast, everyone sitting at home, even I think some of the rules officials online all seem to unanimously, Fitz, say that this in their mind was targeting here. So you've been through a lot of the seminars when we were all at ESPN. It would go through before the college football season, and referees would come in and try and teach us all as analysts about what to look for in targeting. So we'd be able to explain this when we get on a broadcast. So can you explain in your mind why this was or wasn't targeting and whether they got the call right?
So funny moment, I'll throw myself under the bus. They do a college football seminar at ESPN. And they had officials come out and tell us all about targeting. We watched a bunch of examples, and then everybody in the room, hundreds of people, took a pop quiz basically where they played a play, and we had to decide, was that targeting, yes or no? And the room voted. None of us got any of them right. And it's funny because I say that not because we're not all trying, it's because it's so complicated. I pulled the rule up in the rule book for targeting and forcible contact. And when in question, it is a foul. It is part of the rule. When in question, it is a foul. So to me, this one was in question, but it does say that indications include a launch. There was no launch on that. A crouch followed by an upward and forward thrust to attack with forcible contact to the head. There wasn't really a crouch for that. Leading with the helmet, shoulder, forearm to attack with forcible contact at the head or neck area. Kind of felt like that might have applied. And then lowering the head before attacking by initiating forcible contact with the crown of the helmet. Those are some of the indicators to look for. I don't understand this. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was going to say there was no crouch, there was no launch, and there was no crown of the helmet. He hit his face mask into the receiver's face mask. He didn't drop his head at all. So it gets a bit muddled on what they actually call targeting and not. I think they go overboard on targeting, and I was extremely happy, and I had no dog in the race that there was no call for targeting there because he did not launch. It did not look like it intended to hit in the helmet at all, and I think you need to look at that. And it didn't fit the crouch. It didn't fit the launch. It didn't fit the crown of the helmet. And I know the end-all, be-all, Mike, is if you hit a defenseless receiver in the head with any part of your body that's supposed to be targeting. But I'm not going to lie. It didn't meet some of that criteria that Jason laid out, and I'm happy they didn't call targeting.
Yeah, that was kind of my initial reaction. It seemed like it was face mask to face mask in a way that was doing their best to avoid ducking his head on the hit on that play, and rewarding it by not calling it targeting, to me, actually made some semblance of sense because to Fitz's point, there are two versions of this rule. There is, if you hit with the crown of the helmet anywhere on a player, doesn't have to be defenseless or anything like that, you can be reviewed for targeting if you dip your head. That's designed to protect the tackler as much as it is the person being tackled. But then there is the version of striking the head or neck of a defenseless player with one of those targeting indicators. And that to me was the difference, Fitz, is I did not feel like there was an indicator that met the criteria to make that fully targeting. And so I understood it. And I get it came at a pivotal point in this game. This was late in the game. Arizona could have been driving with a chance to win should this penalty have been assessed and maybe giving them an opportunity to not have this go into overtime. So I can understand the frustration. But again, if the end goal of this punitive behavior is to make players hit in a way that is safer for their colleagues, this feels like that kind of met that criteria as well as they could, given the bang-bang nature of it.
Isn't this also why referees are damned if they do and damned if they don't? Every single time a ref makes a big call at the end of a game, we yell and scream, officials shouldn't be injecting themselves in the game. They shouldn't be deciding how this game comes out. Like, it's not up to the officials. Let them play. And then they let them play. And it's like, well, how could they not make that call there? I don't know what you're supposed to do if you're an official. I don't know what you're supposed to do if you're a replay official. Like, if you sit there and you look at it and you say it doesn't meet the criteria, everybody trashes you for not making the call. If you sit there and make the call, everybody trashes you for impacting the end of the game. Like, what do we want them to do?
And the bottom line, remember, there wasn't a flag thrown on that play. I don't believe there was not a flag, but it went to review. So I'm at least happy it goes to review and everybody can kind of take a breath and look at it, because too many times you see it the other way, whether it's college or the NFL. If it's a hard hit, refs are going to throw the flag. And I'm glad they kind of have a backup system that say, okay, wait a minute, that flag wasn't warranted, because I think refs are instructed to, if it's anywhere near the head or neck area and it's a hard hit, throw the flag, play the safe side of it. And that's why I'm glad they review it.
This is why, though,
Yeah,
I wish college football and the NFL would implement the XFL strategy that they used to have of miking up the review booth. If we had all heard the review with somebody wearing a mic saying, here's what I don't see, here's what I do see, it would answer a lot of these questions. If they would simply let us have access to the review room with microphones so we know what people are looking for. The number of times when I was covering the XFL, I would sit there with my co-host and we'd see a call and I'd say, well, that's stupid. And then they'd review it and you'd hear Dean Blandino say, well, here's what I see, here's what I don't see. And by the end of it, you're like, I may not agree, but at least I understand your logic. If they would simply mic up all of these review rooms, it would end the conspiracy theories. It would end the yelling. It would end the screaming.
Yeah, I do think that there's a point to transparency is necessary, given the fact that we have so many cameras on this and so much of the technology around these replays and around these penalties is because you've got to defend against TV audiences at home that get to see this a lot better than the officials on the fly from a million different camera angles before they get over to that huddle there. So it was definitely a call that was somewhat controversial, but I ultimately think they got right. And I know that's going to be, nails on a chalkboard for some people here, but that's the way the news goes. Fitz, we mentioned we wanted to talk a little bit about the non-CFP games here. And we had the ReliaQuest Bowl featuring Alabama and Michigan, where Michigan pulls off a 19-13 win and ends Alabama's 16 consecutive season streak of double-digit wins in year one for Kalen DeBoer here. I know bowl games outside of the CFP are always going to get questions about motivation, but Fitz, for a world that constantly wants to use the results of these playoff games as a means to undercut teams like Boise State or teams like Arizona State or teams like SMU, I do feel like it would be disingenuous not on the other side to at least say a reminder that this year's Alabama team was the one that everyone wanted to break the wheel for, always felt ridiculous to me, and this result does not help that argument one bit.
Yeah, and I mean, if you watch the game, did you feel like Bama was mailing it in? Do you feel like Bama wasn't playing hard? Do you feel like Jalen Milroe didn't have a lot to play for in that game? Do you think putting bad tape on out there for the world to see for a quarterback that's about to try and go get drafted? Do you think that was part of the objective for Jalen Milroe? You think Jalen Milroe didn't want to have the game of his life against Michigan? And Michigan, by the way, that was without several key players in that game and still went out and played really well. I mean, Michigan played with the thunder of the gods. So, if Alabama didn't, is that on all of us to sit there and say they didn't have the motivation, or is that a Kalen DeBoer question? I mean, I think Kalen DeBoer did a nice job with Bama, but I want to go back to what we said in July coming into the year. I mean, I got yelled at and screamed at a lot by SEC fans that called me a moron because I said Alabama's going to take a step back, not because Kalen DeBoer isn't good, but because Kalen DeBoer is just human. When you've had a superhuman coach for a generation in Nick Saban, like, guess what? When you don't have a superhuman coach, it takes a little step back, like that little edge. All you need to lose is a little bit of the edge, and suddenly you lose some football games. This was an Alabama team that was inconsistent this year. This is an Alabama team that got their asses whooped by Oklahoma. It wasn't like I can't believe they lost that. They got crushed by Oklahoma. This is an Alabama team that had bad, forgettable games. And the bowl game was just a reminder of how up and down Alabama was this year. And I think you're right, Mike. It's only fair to look at the bowl outcome just the same that we look at the playoff outcome and say, wonder if this team really was a top 12 team in all of college football this year. Because I think Alabama proved that there's a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we do with a team like Alabama is we're so used to them being in the playoffs and being on top that all of a sudden they struggle a little bit and you scratch your head. But I look at the Michigan side of this. They finished on a 3-game winning streak. Now, Northwestern was the first one where they blew them out. But then it was Ohio State and Alabama. I mean, pretty damn impressive for the year. You knew it was going to be a down year for them, and you knew the way they wanted to win this game with tough defense, which obviously was manifested in the fact they had 5 sacks in this game, and a running attack. 51. They weren't going to let Davis Warren throw the ball all over the park. Threw the ball 12 times. They ran it 51 times. They built up a 16-0 lead in the first quarter. It was 16-10, I believe, at halftime. And it was a close game. It was a defensive struggle. Michigan didn't run the ball well either. They ran it 51 times, but they only averaged a little over 2 yards a rush, but they controlled the clock. They held the ball for 17 more minutes than Alabama, and Alabama just couldn't get anything going offensively.
It was a struggle, and you look at them. South Carolina also lost to Illinois in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, where we had good old-fashioned coach beef in that one. Like, you could say these games don't matter. it appeared to matter a whole lot to Shane Beamer and Brett Bielema at the end of that game. If anyone missed it, in the third quarter, there was an injured Illinois player over by the South Carolina team bench, and Brett Bielema came over there to check on his player, and then while he was there, was extending his arms, making the signal that you commonly see of players on kick return that are going back there as the signal that they're going to let the ball go overhead and not return the football. South Carolina, who had cleared this with the Big 12 officials before the game, had a kick return where they had done that signal and then gone out there and actually fielded the ball, and I believe actually had a lateral on that play that ultimately got tackled on the 25. But Dad, Brett Bielema took some umbrage with the gamesmanship from South Carolina's Shane Beamer, took a shot at his integrity, and you'd have thought Shane Beamer got something said about his mama the way he reacted after that one. What'd you make of the coach spat, Dad?
Well, I'll tell you, because on that kick, and why the players, and it is, I was shocked it wasn't a rule. When the players throw their arms out, meaning they're not going to return it, the kickoff team kind of lets up. I mean, that's the whole idea. Then nobody's going to get hurt because there's not going to be a kick return. And a player for Illinois did get hurt on the play, and that's what Bielema was so upset about. It's like, wait a minute. The integrity is your guy puts his arms out, you're not returning the ball, and then you return the ball. First off, that should be a rule. You put your arms out, to me, that's like a fair catch signal. Because when they do fair catch it like inside the 5-yard line, then obviously they're allowed to fair catch it, and that you're not allowed to hit the guy. You put your arms out. I mean, I know it's not a rule, but I kind of agree with Brett in saying, you know what, that's kind of the universal signal that you're not going to return it. Now, on Shane Beamer's side, it isn't a rule. He did okay it with the refs, so he didn't break any rules. But man, I was a little bit stunned because I obviously didn't know that. I thought when you put your arms out, that ended it. Just like a fair catch. I thought that ended it. They're letting the ball go over his head. They're not returning it. They need to change that rule. I mean, because you got a player hurt who was kind of slowing up on the kickoff return, and then they ran like a lateral. So, Jason, I think that's something they need to absolutely change.
And there's you're right. And there's this modern culture thing that we love for some reason of coaches finding weird loopholes because it's clever. But it's just funny to me because when you were a kid, if your parents busted you doing something, you're like, well, actually, let me tell you, I found a loophole to the rule. Like, ain't nobody going to sit there and reward that. But as you're a college football coach, they're like, oh, man, look at that. He's so smart. He figured out a way around the rule. Like, there is some spirit of the rule moment that I understand where Bielema was coming from. And, yeah, college football, I think, will go in and change the rule. And then everybody can look at it and say, huzzah, Beamer, you got one off on a bowl game. But I don't understand sometimes why we come in and we're like, oh, I just love the fact that the coach knew this loophole and the way they were going to get around it. It's like, all right, so we're sort of cheating, but we're not really cheating. And that makes it fun because you found a way to get around the rules as they're intended.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate the attention to detail that allows coaching staffs to take advantage of some of these things here. And to Shane's point, they talked about it with the officials before this took place to make sure, hey, we're clear on this, we're good to go. And that's something, by the way, a lot of especially special teams coordinators will do with trick plays. They'll get with the officials and they'll say, hey, we've got this in the playbook now. Notre Dame went through this with a fake punt earlier this year where they had brought officials in the preseason and cleared it with them only to have it flagged incorrectly in a game. And so usually that's what happens, that conversation, this moment. Ultimately, Dad, I agree with you. That rule needs to change because it can put players in harm's way here. But it was kind of nice seeing the way that these guys responded to it, just because it does matter. Like, there's so much conversation about bowl season and what does and doesn't matter. These guys were fired up for their players. For Brett Bielema in Illinois, a 10-win season is something that never happens around there that he was able to usher this team into. So all of that, to me, shows, Jason, that this does matter more than people give it credit for.
It does. I just want to point out the hypocrisy. We sit here and ask kids to care about sportsmanship all the time, which is just total BS. We know that. But then coaches, when they find loopholes, instead of going to the rule book people and saying, hey, found a loophole we should probably fix, they turn around and find a way to manipulate it because sportsmanship only matters if you're the kid playing it, apparently. I'm just saying.
Apparently. Check out more great takes like that over at Yahoo Sports. Jason Fitz, always kind enough to give us some time. Happy New Year, Fitzy. We appreciate you.
Happy New Year, boys. Appreciate it.
All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. We've talked a lot about the game of the day yesterday, at least in terms of the message sent. Ohio State clobbering Oregon in the Rose Bowl. And so for more on that, I want to talk to someone who not only was there, but there for her first ever Rose Bowl as a part of ESPN's team calling the game here. Stormy Buonantony, kind enough to join us now here. Stormy, first off, congratulations. That had to be so cool. How was the experience of your first Rose Bowl game being out there in Pasadena?
Yeah, thank you. It was amazing. As a West Coast kid, have always wanted to go to the Rose Bowl. It was a bucket list event for me, period. And so my first time to be on the sideline working the game with freaking Kirk Herbstreit, Chris Fowler, and Holly Rowe on the opposite sideline I'm still not sure how it happened, but I'm not asking questions to the bosses. I'm just kind of leaving it at that. I'm glad that it all worked out, but it was an amazing day. I was telling you before we came on, it's funny how many people have been to Rose Bowls year after year after year, and were coming up to me after just saying, hey, I'm sorry you didn't get a better game. But dude, I was still skipping out of there. I had so much fun. It was a dream, truly.
Well, obviously, you guys can all hear one another from the booth to the sidelines, even in breaks. There's talk. I mean, how at what point was everybody in maybe in the break in your ear talking about how surprised they were at just what a runaway this was?
Yeah, it was early, and especially because you just think about, like, it was offense and defense for Ohio State, right? It's not like Will Howard and Jeremiah Smith were explosive, and then it's a back and forth game where Dylan Gabriel and that offense is taking advantage, like, quite frankly, many of us expected would be the case based on the way that Oregon played in that first matchup. We had 7 lead changes in that game, 3 in the fourth quarter, and then they just had a no-show for 29 minutes. And we were talking in the commercial breaks, like, is this really going to get out of hand like this? When's Oregon going to wake up? And it took 29 minutes for them to wake up and finally get on the board and do something. And I think we as a group collectively did kind of hope that when Oregon won that middle 8, right? Like they score before halftime and then they come out strong on that opening drive to start the second half, that maybe we can get something rolling here a little bit. And then Ohio State just said, nope, we're actually just going to put our foot down and finish this thing.
I was going to ask, was there anything as you guys prep for this during the week and you talk to players and coaches and kind of get the pulse of these two teams, was there anything during the week that hinted that this could be a possible outcome of this game and what you guys saw?
I didn't think so, because talking to both sets of coaches and players, like, there was a lot of confidence that came through. I think for me personally, and I was talking to Ian Fitzsimmons about this on the sideline going into the game, because, you know, he and I are both betting people. And so he's like, who do you like? And I felt like maybe I was a little bit biased because I had been deeper with Ohio State in my prep and they were the sideline that I was going to be on for the game. So I did more interviews and I spent a longer time at their practice talking to people and watching things. So I thought that they were the better team that was going to win. But I didn't see it being like that because of the confidence that I saw from Oregon as well coming into the game. I was pretty stunned by the way that first half transpired.
So you said you worked the Ohio State sideline. Give us a feel for that sideline, from the euphoria of going out to a big lead to then maybe Ryan Day have to telling guys, hey, stay in the game, as players were celebrating on the sideline.
100%. And they were vibing early. I'm such a Will Howard fan, just knowing his story and kind of how things came about for him at Kansas State. And then, you know, taking them to a Big 12 championship and then taking a step back and then bringing a transfer in, and then Avery Johnson and them trying to work him in, knowing that he was going to be the quarterback of the future. Then he comes to Ohio State and has to earn himself being a leader. He has the terrible clock management gaffe at the end of that first game against Oregon, and his redemption story for this game, you could see how much on the sideline he was feeling it. And there was at one point where he just like took his fist and banged on his helmet and screamed because he was just living in every moment. And I was just really happy for him to have the performance that he did, back-to-back games now with Tennessee and Oregon, that he just showed out playing on a different level. And I felt like as a quarterback, that was super contagious for the whole group. And that just group of senior and graduate leadership that Ohio State has, all of them are very vocal. All of them are such strong leaders that, like, throughout the entire group, it was really, really cool to see, at least from my sideline. I felt for Holly, guys, because we linked up at halftime just to talk for a few minutes, and Oregon was flatlined just from the jump. Everything. It wasn't guys getting on each other. It wasn't frustration, really. It was just not a lot there.
Was there any of that when you guys talked? And I don't know how much of a conversation this was for your crew in the lead up of the rest versus rust portion of this, where Oregon had the time off because of the bye. That's a new part of the college football playoff. And did that have any effect on the way that they came out? Maybe a little flat.
Maybe. I mean, we're seeing all these teams that have had buys so far kind of come out with that flat element, but that wasn't a big conversation piece for us coming in. It was a question we asked the coaches, certainly, but like Dan Lanning, you could tell even post-game on the podium, he's not a person that's going to use that as an excuse. It's about getting your team ready. I feel like the rust thing for football, and you guys tell me, like, you guys played it, I feel like it's actually a good thing for you to just get your bodies right after what's been such a long season. That I understand, like, wanting to roll and building some of that momentum with an early round game, but physically, don't you kind of appreciate that rest?
Listen, you can make rest work for you, or you can justify it just like you can justify no buy. So but to your point, yes, you can heal up maybe some minor nicks, but yeah, you kind of make it work to your advantage, whatever situation you're in, whether you have rest or don't have rest. You talked about the vocal leaders, the upperclassmen for Ohio State. Talk about Jeremiah Smith, though, in this true freshman and his impact on the game and just what you saw from him.
He is a freak of nature. And this was the first time that I had ever seen Ohio State in person. And to be at practice and then be on the sideline and see him physically, he is a specimen. For him to be a true freshman, that, like, nothing about him looks or says 18-year-old. It just doesn't. And for him to come into that game with all of the confidence that he did on the podium, saying no one can cover me one-on-one, and if you give me one-on-one, we're going to take a shot, and living up to that the way that he did. Like, I even asked him when we were talking in our meetings, do you feel like you poked the bear a little bit there? Are you concerned about maybe them gunning for you in this game? And he's like, I dared them. I'm not scared. He said, if I get one-on-one, I'm just smiling because I know I'm going to win. He has such a high level of confidence for someone his age that you know the sky is the limit for him. He had 161 yards on 5 catches and 2 touchdowns in the first half. Like, just punishing. And I felt for Oregon's defense too, like the way that Ohio State was just able to take advantage of miscommunication, get guys open. It was wild to me.
It truly took everyone by surprise, and Jeremiah Smith was the tip of the spear in terms of just how effective that Ohio State offense was. So it was incredible to see from where we sat. It was incredible to watch you go out and do your thing, and I can only imagine what the granddaddy of them all looked like from the sideline there. Congrats, Stormy. Hell of a job there. Thanks for getting up early with us. We really appreciate the time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Stormy.
Yeah, Dad, that to me now, and Ohio, she mentioned the betting portion of this. On DraftKings Sportsbook right now, Ohio State plus 120 is the odds-on favorite to win the national championship, followed by Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, and then Georgia, as they both have to play an extra game. They're going to be further down that list, but it's going to take a lot to beat this Ohio State team at this point, Dad, if the weapons that they have, and especially the offensive line, which we thought might be the weak spot, especially after all that injury, continues to play the way that they have in these first 2 playoff games. This is a team that just might be too talented to overcome if that's also going to be a secure area for them.
And that old line, they replaced their left tackle and center. 2 great players. I mean, it's amazing what they've done, and stringing the first 2 playoff games together in dominant form, they should be the favorite. I mean, can they keep it up for 2 more games is going to be the question. They certainly have the talent. The talent has never been the issue for Ohio State. No. Getting the recruits, getting the talent, getting the blue blood athletes there. It's always been finishing for them, and boy, are they finishing like crazy now.
We gave Joe Tooney love for sliding out to tackle for Kansas City and doing a great job. Donovan Jackson, one of the best guards in college football, just effortlessly slid out to left tackle and has helped solidify that group ever since. It has been as impressive as any individual performance on that team, and it is why they're moving on and the favorite to win it all in college football. All right, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you into the rest of the day. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out live Monday through Friday, right here at 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Start off your new year the right way. Go to GoJo and Golic on YouTube. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell so you know when we're going live. Thank you to everybody, the almost 2,000 people that go and check that out every day. If you miss any of our great guests, and thank you to Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports who joined us today, and Stormy Buonantony, who you can catch over on VSiN and was part of the sideline coverage of the Rose Bowl with Oregon and Ohio State. You can check that out wherever you get our podcast or right here as soon as we get done on YouTube. And Dad, let's start off with this. I feel like comparatively overall, we've heard a lot less about the recruitment and development of LeBron James's other son, Bryce James, the younger son. We know Bronny went to USC last year and then was drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers in the second round this year. Bryce James is now committed to Arizona as a part of their 2025 recruiting class. He was a 4-star prospect out of Sierra Canyon in California and held offers from Ohio State and Duquesne. So I'm not going to lie, Dad, don't know much about him as a prospect here. And again, maybe it's just the same name thing, but I feel like in general, the buzz around Bryce has always been lesser than someone named LeBron James Jr.
Yeah. I mean, and Bronny was 6'2", and obviously he had the heart issue at USC, so that really set him back. And we all know the story. Drafted by the Lakers and got to play with his dad. First time father and son played together in an NBA game. Bryce is 6'6". I mean, he's got the height. He's a 4-star recruit. And you're right. He has definitely talked about less than Bronny, but boy, he's got the size. And I don't know about him being an NBA prospect, but is it possible LeBron waits another year to play with another son, to go through this all again with Bryce?
Oh.
I mean, you have no idea at this point. I don't think so, but what the hell? I don't know. LeBron said he could play 5 to 7 more years, but won't. But I can imagine him at least playing another year or two.
Yeah, I mean, if it meant that much to him to play with one son, I didn't realize that Bryce was going to be this close to where he could play for 2. Now, this would require LeBron to play another season coming up here in 2025 and then potentially a season after that. So maybe asking a bit much for a guy that might just want out of the situation in Los Angeles by the end of this year. But congrats to the family. Got to be pretty cool. We'll see if maybe he gets to stick around in college longer than a year if the rest of those stressors aren't as much there. Emerson, let's get to that because I feel like this is going to take a little bit to unpack here.
Yeah. I'm going to do my best to simplify this thing. All right, so UK spy agency GCHQ just released its annual Christmas card puzzle to uncover future code breakers. So basically, it's a seasonal greeting card that doubles as a set of devilishly difficult puzzles designed to excite young minds about solving puzzles and unearthing clues. The challenge is aimed at young people ages 11 to 18 who are encouraged to work in teams and use lateral thinking and perseverance to crack the 7 brain teasers set by the in-house puzzlers. I don't know, what are they're looking for future
They're trying
spies?
to find spies through a greeting card here. This is the government
wow.
communications headquarters that's basically using this holiday Christmas card to try and recruit future spies. And they said it's designed to get like 11 to 18-year-olds more interested in STEM projects and working together and trying to find people that think critically who may want to get into this line of work. Dad, all I could think about when Emerson was reading this was how wholly uninteresting this would be to someone like you who always says, I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. And the thought of you having to spend time decoding a holiday card sounds like your worst nightmare.
Well, it wouldn't get to that point because I wouldn't spend time doing it. I would look at it, my eyes would glaze, they would start to water, and I'd put it down and grab a piece of cake or a holiday cookie. I mean, they've been doing this since 2015, trying to get the youth interested in cybersecurity or being a spy. And they say this is used in like schools, as teachers will use it for students in schools for critical thinking and things like that. I couldn't be less interested. That's why there are spies and people in cybersecurity, and my name is never attached to them, nor will it be attached to them, nor would I want it be attached to them. It seems like my brain would hurt trying to think that much. That's the thing, Mike, and you know me, especially at this age. I mean, I give up on things quickly because I know, A, my wife Chris will take care of it, or B, you, Jake, or Sydney, or now I have great, daughter-in-law Jenny and son-in-law Ben who will take care of it. I don't have to critically think anymore. Not that I critically thought a lot in my life, but I don't have to critically think anymore in my life. I don't have to figure out puzzles. I don't have to figure out technology. I have an array of people that I either married or raised that can help me in these situations.
So what you're trying to say is you have aged out of curiosity.
Yes, I've aged, not even curious. I've aged out of the work it takes to be curious. I've aged out of all of it.
I like that.
I'm a simple man.
Yeah, that's what I like about you. It's easy to have a conversation with you, Not going to be any brain teasers.
I will say, part of me wonders how soon it will be before NFL teams start sending these kind of cards to prospects in the upcoming drafts to see what kind of answers they get. The never-ending sleuth work that is the NFL draft pre-process, Dad. I wouldn't be stunned by anything if they try and tap into this.
Hey, listen, I got a 36 on the Wonderlic test, which is really good, and it got me drafted in the 10th round. So I don't know how much critical thinking the teams are gonna want to put the prospects through. The prospects just kind of walking away, putting, if it's multiple choice, C. That's what you do on a multiple choice test, right?
Dude, you could be a spy across the pond, man, with the Wonderlic score that high. Good for you.
Yeah. Moving on, Emerson, let's get to the third here and away from my dad's budding career in espionage. What do we got?
Yeah, your dad's going to really love this one. So Collins Dictionary went with brat. Oxford chose brain rot. But in a brutally divided country here, gentlemen, the U.S. Premier Dictionary skipped the slang. Merriam-Webster's word of the year, polarization. Oh, yeah, based on search traffic, reflecting a year of political and celebrity division. This is really wonderful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't think of a more appropriate word given where we're at, so it definitely hits the nail on the head.
I never use that word. It's too bad.
Yeah, 2023 was authentic, 22 was gaslighting, 21 was vaccine, 20 was pandemic. They really went out on a limb on those. 19 was they, 18 was justice, 17 was feminism, 16 was surreal. I like 2015 was ism.
Yeah.
What the hell is ism? I mean, this is something, in all honesty, I don't care about.
Neither do I.
The word of the year. But to your point, Mike, it certainly fits where we are. There's no doubt about that.
You know what? I'm glad I at least know this one. It took me probably until it was named the word of the year to actually understand what gaslighting was. I spent so much of my life just nodding in agreement on that one. Dad, could you even explain gaslighting now, Dad?
No. I just smile and nod. It's like we were out to dinner the other day with me and your mother with Sydney and her husband Ben, and we were talking about getting dessert stunningly, and we were talking about like a cake or a pie with ice cream a la mode, apple pie a la mode, and Sydney did not know what a la mode was.
No,
she goes, we're like, didn't you ever ask a question? She said, no, I just kind of smiled and nodded like I knew, just like I did with gaslighting.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gaslighting. I'm like, yeah, he's gaslighting. That's what he's doing. He's gaslighting.
It's incredible.
But yeah, she didn't know what a la mode was for apple pie a la mode.
Oh my God. I'm on these work trips all the time with Billy, who's behind the camera in studio this morning. And the number one question he asks when we're out to eat is he always asks the waiter or waitress if ice cream comes with the dessert that he orders. So he's big into the a la mode scene.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I hear a story about my sister, I firmly believe that Notre Dame should take her degree back. They have to be just disgusted sitting here and listening to us talk in general in this entire segment, with my dad basically saying that learning is just completely out of the window for him, and that my sister, who's also confounded by the even concept of Wi-Fi, has no idea what a la mode means right now. We're going to go loosen up for our wrestling match with Emerson. Download, subscribe, rate, review the show, leave it a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. Enjoy the game today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.